So hello guys, today I wanted to just make this video about a thing I journaled not too long ago, referring to criticism, and obviously you read the title and chose to watch this, so let's get straight into it. And the question that I journaled was, what am I doing or not doing to avoid criticism, right? And I think it's a pretty important thing to ask yourself because of the implications that it has. So to make it easier, I'm describing criticism as what it is, obviously, but also referring to like being disliked or judged, even if the thing you're doing isn't inherently wrong or worthy of criticism. So not exclusively rational criticism, also irrational, emotional, and whatever people might be saying about you. So to get straight into it, I've got the things that I journaled, and I'm going to talk about them, and I suppose I have some solutions that I've thought of to my own ones. And if you make this your own journal entry and decide to look into this into yourself, you might be able to identify these things. But it's not necessarily only about identifying them, it's also about solving them to make something out of them. So if I got start off, I've obviously, with the description I gave, some things come up in my life that obviously I've done to avoid being criticized. And one of the first things that came into mind at the time of writing this journal entry was basically a practical thing I got into, where I was going to live with some people in a new house, but then I backed out of that because of some reasons that came up. It doesn't really matter, but then I really, really wanted to live on my own this coming year, obviously this coming academic year while I'm at uni, in my own place, outside of uni. And it got to the point where it got pretty difficult to set this up, especially since I'm the first time, renter or buyer or whatever. I'm renting. Don't have enough money to buy. But the point is, first time doing this, you don't really have much history. Most people don't want to accept you, and the ones that do will charge you a lot of money if you know anything about this. Which some of you might have already lived through this. Some of you might only be coming to this part of your life. But anyways, I really, really wanted to live on my own and wanted to, have my independence. And also part of it was to be able to say that I was living on my own in my own place. And of course, this is quite ambitious for someone like me, but I really, really wanted it done. And I spent a lot of time and energy and money trying to set this up until I got hit with this stark realization around the same time that I journaled this, that I'm not really doing this necessarily for myself and for my long term, like it's not the best move, I came to the conclusion of, because it was ultimately attempting to live beyond my means, because it was a lot harder to set up than it should have been, and I just didn't have enough money for that, and I'm comfortable saying that because ultimately I don't really care if I get criticized that much about things like this. But living beyond your means for the sake of impressing others is really what this thing came down to. And obviously this is one practical example that might, affect you in your life, whether or not you want to buy something or have something. I've had also this with other things, like buying a car, buying a motorbike, whatever. Like I've really wanted those things, not necessarily for their practical use, because sometimes that use is limited for other reasons. Like where I live, for example, I don't necessarily need these things, but living beyond your means just for the sake of impressing others. And I felt really shit when I found a different option on living, because it wasn't exactly the same kind of flashy idea that I had in my mind of where I wanted to live and how I wanted to be able to describe what I was doing and how I was living. You know how it is. So that was one of the first things that came up, and the solutions I kind of just came up with to this thing you might be doing to avoid criticism, which is living beyond your means for the sake of impressing others, and not only impressing others but also feeling good about yourself and having that ego hit, was to ground yourself in your reality. You really need to, even if you're working on things, for example, that may allow you to live at a better, for example, slightly higher quality of life in the future. If those things aren't currently making you money, like my YouTube channel is, like this was never hugely really about money, but that was obviously going to be something I wanted out of this, right? If that's not necessarily making me money, which it isn't right now, or I don't have a good job, which I currently don't really have right now, I'm not going to be able to live that exact life, and I shouldn't, want to do that just for the ego that comes with being able to say that, and from the reactions of the people I tell, oh wow, you're doing all this so well. Like it's not that great, so I shouldn't pretend it's that great, when I'm not able to make it that way, because ultimately what that would result in is just a worse quality of life, less security, less money, less everything, while I'm still trying to stabilize myself and not sink the ship I'm currently living in. Do you get what I mean? So ground yourself and accept, really important, accept that the plans that you have will fail a lot of the time. And this goes back to a greater problem, and I've done a whole video about failure and whatnot, but that was mainly targeted at broader things. But the same philosophy has to apply to not just your big goals and things failing along the way for your big goals, but also for your smaller goals, like where you live, like the things you want to get, like the things you want to do. You're not always going to be able to do them because the plans fail. And if you ground yourself in that reality, you may be able to be prepared for those things better. Moving on to the next thing that I do and don't do to avoid criticism was not working on my YouTube, despite how much this means to me. And clearly it doesn't mean enough if I'm not producing, or I'm just really, really lazy. And it does mean a lot to me, and I like fantasizing about helping people on the internet and trying to change lives with whatever advice I might be able to give. But I at least I don't consider myself to work on YouTube enough to the point that it's the most important thing, and it really should be. I really want it to be that way, and I'm currently working on a lot of stuff in my mind to basically push myself harder with this goal of mine. But anyways, not working enough on YouTube despite how much I depend on this working. Basically, the life I want to live eventually will be grounded on the work I'm doing right now, and this means a lot to me. This is kind of a big goal for me, either way I look at it, right? But I guess I don't work on it enough for many reasons, but mainly because I don't really like people knowing that I work on it. I don't really like people I know to know what I'm doing, and also I think that they'll think this is cringe, that I film myself and talk to a camera and give advice on the internet. I don't like the opinion that comes with that people give, and getting caught up in the idea that I'm building in silence and I'm working in silence and doing it all on my own, and that's one thing, working in silence. But if you're working in silence and you're not actually doing anything, then it's not particularly working at all. But then obviously that also goes to the other way around. I'm too scared of sounding like I'm doing so much work but not actually progressing. So that would be not building in silence, that would be building loudly, but you're just making noise, you're not actually building anything, just to get people to hear that, oh, he's actually doing something, he's working on something. I'm kind of, I don't want to be criticized for what I do. I don't want to be hated for the fact that I do these videos and that this is what I'm doing. And a lot of people really don't like it when I tell them these things, or, would find this cringe. Although I've started to change that slowly since I made this entry and started basically making people, telling people that this is what I'm actually doing. This is really, really what I want to work towards. And most people have come to that with respect. And, I haven't really had a lot of hate come from this. A lot of people, think maybe this is a bit far-fetched, a bit pointless to want this sort of thing, or to expect that this will work. People are still skeptical of online incomes and so on. But, it still makes me fear criticism when I tell people what I do. But most of the time, people don't care enough to criticize me, even when I tell them. Even when I show them my channel and, how it is and what I do, even the people that don't really, really care about the message I'm sending out here, most of them haven't really hated on it that much. They just really either didn't care or, didn't look at it at all, even to attempt to care. So that's another thing, is if you've got a project like me, for example, with YouTube, and you've got some sort of purposeful thing, but you don't think people will understand it, and you think that people will hate it, it goes back to the same thing. You look cringe until you're successful. You look crazy until, you're a genius. That's the whole point, right? And I'm not trying to make myself sound like that, of course. I try to remain humble in these things, but if you really do believe in what you're doing, you'll tell people what you believe in, right? And more importantly, you'll act on it. So that's another thing. If you're obviously anything like me, which I presume you are if you watch my videos, you've got something you're working on. You might be kind of not necessarily fearful, but also could be fearful of criticism, of how people will perceive the work you're doing, So that's another thing. You need to understand that you don't have to necessarily build in silence, and also, you're limiting your ability to build if you're actively trying to stay quiet about it, because sometimes you do need to be loud. Sometimes I do need to, if I want this to work, I need to overcome these obstacles, okay? And this whole video is kind of weirdly in the first person, but let's go with it. These obstacles that I'm talking about is, filming while my family's at home. They're not at home right now, which is, I guess, a failure on my part, but also when they're home, it's quite loud. It's harder to produce a good video, but not necessarily always. Mainly, even when there's good opportunities to film at home, I sometimes be scared because my door is right there. Either of my two family members that live here could hear what I'm saying, could judge what I'm saying, and could also walk in on me and see this setup right here of me filming myself talk to a camera and be like, this is stupid, what are you doing, and interrupt my thing. So, that's another thing. I'm kind of scared of doing this sort of thing around my family because I just don't really want to hear their criticism, don't want to hear them say, oh, this is whatever, this is this, do you really think that it'll work like this? Even though I don't, necessarily believe they'll hate on the work I do, I don't want to even chance it, I don't even want to take that risk that someone might hate it, might hate what I'm doing, or might, criticize me and dislike my work, even if it's a bit irrational. And another thing is also that comes down to beliefs, and less, goal-like beliefs, like this channel is, for example. It's a goal and it's a belief of mine that I can make this work, but also beliefs, my fundamental core beliefs, right? I fear expressing them so much, not only to the people around me, but also to you guys on YouTube, I'm a Catholic. I'm quite religious. I believe in God a lot, and I really, really like talking about God and religion. And I like, telling this to people who are religious and people who aren't religious. But, I still kind of don't make a lot of theological content because I'm kind of scared of how it will be received. And I also have a suspicion that it won't do very well for some reason, even though it might. There are plenty of religious content creators out there who have made it work and been really successful, spreading the message. But I still fear doing it occasionally because I'm scared that, the people who it hits the wrong way, or, people will find my videos who this isn't really made for, will really, really, rail on it because it's not what they believe in, but it's what I believe in. And I'm scared of, expressing my values because they'll criticize them on the internet or whatever, And the solution to this is, if you're like me and you post content on the internet, or you do anything that involves revealing, your views and your core values, or even teaching them, not necessarily just revealing them. That's really what I want to do, is I want to teach, right? That's kind of what, excites me. And if you're doing this on the internet, the advice that I came to is that, the internet is pretty well designed to bring the right people in, and obviously it's imperfect, and obviously you do get hate if you post anything on the internet, but the internet's pretty good because it's more incentivized to find people who do like your content, regardless of what your content is. And that's how people have been successful either way, because the internet will find those people for you. That's the whole point, right? It'll find the right people. You just need to make enough content, and that's the actionable thing for me right now, is to make more content, even if it's not exactly what I think would be tailored to most people. I need to tailor it to the people that really need this advice that I'm going to give them, right? So let me get this straight. The solution is to just do the thing. Share my values, because the internet will find me people who want to hear them, or could make use of them, because that's what it's really designed to do, isn't it? And the final thing, on a personal level, I find myself really inauthentic with people a lot of the time, because I don't really like, I'll say this on the internet, but I won't say this to people in person. This is the weird thing, right? Because to me, the people on the internet are a bit different to the people I know in person, because a perception of me is only what I've put out there. But I would never say this to someone in person, but I could say it to someone on the internet, is that I am really, really inauthentic with people most of the time, people that I know. And, like, inauthentic in who I really am, what I really believe in. And this really ties into the whole two problems I just described beforehand. A, with my religious views, and B, with, my fundamental goals in life. I rarely tell people that I'm doing this YouTube thing. And even if I do, I won't tell them what it is or show them the channel and pray that they don't find it, because, that's kind of a part of me that I'm, only revealing out here. And it's only really it's supposed to be revealed to strangers on the internet, not people I know in real life. And that inauthenticity really just comes from those prior two. So if you do this journaling practice, I guarantee you'll find a lot. I've got quite a lot of pages of me basically spilling this out and describing it. But if these problems and solutions that I find in myself, could help you, that's ultimately the point of this. Is you should try, this exercise of finding out where you're avoiding doing things because of others. And that's really what it seems to come down to, is avoiding things because of others. And you're basically doing that to satisfy other people. And I feel like, as I'm saying this out loud, a lot more good and satisfaction to other people will come from if I just, accept that I'm doing this, accept my reality, and I work on this and stop listening to the criticism, even if it comes, right? And you need to accept that it will come, because if you don't, you'll never take action. Like, you just have to accept that it might be painful here and there, regardless of what it is that you're doing to avoid criticism. Whether it's, trying to get a house that's slightly better than the one you can afford, or slightly more than you can afford to get, and, will lose you a lot of security, and instead changing it for a cheaper place that's a lot shittier, that will save you money and ultimately put you in an environment that's a lot more better for you, ultimately, instead of one that will let you flash the fact that you live on your own. That's one thing, whether it's your personal projects that you're avoiding telling your family and friends about because you're scared of how they'll criticize it. And not even telling them, but also just acting on it around them, right? If it's truly your goal and you believe in it, you should really, rationally not care who's there, because it's your own thing, and you do believe in it. But then again, whether it's this or that, or, hiding your views or hiding your thing or whatever it could be, the point is you need to accept that this hatred, this criticism from other people will come. And this video, might be like a testimony, I guess, to force me to practice what I preach more, because that's what tends to happen when I make these videos. I'll try and, now that I've made these concerns and the workarounds to them, the reality for myself. So now I can, work on this even better. But ultimately, you need to accept that these things will come, and it just comes down to that same old thing. When you take a cold shower, is you suffer more in your mind than you do in person. Because really, when that criticism does come through, it probably won't be anywhere near as bad as you're making it seem. Same for when the cold water hits, and it's not as bad after like 5 seconds, So that's basically been the point of this. If this unstructured style and, just kind of spitting it all out at you has helped you, I hope it has. That's kind of the point of this. And, that's ultimately the message, is that you definitely suffer in your mind a lot more than you do in your person. And that's what I found from journaling this. So if you want to, that's the question to journal. What am I doing or not doing to avoid criticism? That's basically all I've got for today. So, have faith and keep going, my friend.